stylish and now one of the best values in America. Just for a limited time, buy the Super NES Super Set and get 5 complete Mario games standard. Mario! You'll find the Super Set is like no other system. In performance, handling, and Mode 7 control, you'll get Super Mario World, and for $3.50 in postage, Super Mario All-Stars free with 4 Mario games in one. Mario. So stop by your Nintendo dealer today.
And this commercial is the reason this video exists in the first place. The year was 1993, and everybody at school was talking about it. Sega Genesis or Super Nintendo? And keep in mind, this is before Nintendo Power. This is before the internet. You could only go by what you heard through word of mouth. And these Sega Genesis commercials were so cool. Blast processing. I really wanted a Sega, but then my cousin got a Super Nintendo and I played Super Mario World, and then I saw that commercial. That's all I asked for. All year I wanted a Super Nintendo, and then finally Christmas 1993 came. I saw that big box under the tree and I knew. But what I didn't know was there was more than one game sitting under the tree that year. It's not much of a stretch when I say that game is what cemented me as a gamer for the rest of my life.
Christmas 1993. That was when we got our Super Nintendo. And I had very limited experience with the Super Nintendo before that. I mean, I'd played it a couple times at my cousin's house and seen it at the store, but I had never seen nor played A Link to the Past. Ever. I remember the first game I unwrapped at Christmas was this game. I remember the excitement that first hit me, and then it was quickly dulled. I mean, Zelda 1 was so great and I had such great memories, but Zelda 2 was so drastically different, and kudos to them for trying something new, but I didn't know what to expect with this game. Was it going to be like Zelda 1? Or was it going to be another side-scrolling game like Zelda 2? Or were they going to do something completely different? When we finally got our Super Nintendo hooked up, I put this cartridge in first, and it blew my mind. Not only was it, 16-bit, which back then, you saw a 16-bit game and you were like, oh my god, these graphics, what? Beautiful graphics and great colors, and the sound was orchestrated, and the controller was even better. It had more buttons. It was just a lot for a 9-year-old to handle. But then it settled down and I really just enjoyed the game. From a top-down perspective, just everything you love about Zelda 1, but 10 times better. And they added a deep story, tons of characters, and there's so much more. This might end up being one of our longer episodes in this series. I hope you bear with it because we got a lot to talk about. But first, let's get the technical stuff out of the way.
A Link to the Past featured bright, colorful, well-detailed sprites for its graphics, which just seemed to pop out at you, and more animations for each character made the game really seem to come alive. Just comparing the two walking sprites of Link, you can see the huge improvement over the NES version. The bosses were much bigger, and the effects of the environment really made for a lovely looking video game, and puts the player in the game like no other adventure game that came before it. The game also added the ability for stages to have more area than just the regular screen size. In the first Zelda game, areas were only one screen size large, but in A Link to the Past, they can be as big as the developer wants. Some areas are small one-screen rooms, but some of them are gigantic in comparison. Also, areas could have multiple levels of elevation to fight on, allowing Link to jump from ledges to reach new areas and even avoid enemies entirely. Link's sword animation was also changed due to criticisms about his stabbing of the sword in the first two games. Now, and pretty much forever since, Link always slices his sword in an arc, making it easier to hit enemies from multiple angles. On top of that, Nintendo gave Link a spin attack.
A secret technique handed down by all people.
By holding the B button for a second, Link would charge a spin attack, and then unleash a deadly spin that would deal twice the damage to enemies, and also allow him to tap on walls so he could check them to see if he could use a bomb to blow them up. keeping in mind that this was one of the first Super Nintendo games released. Super FX and rendered graphics weren't really around just yet. So keep that in mind. This game looks a bit more dated than later Super Nintendo games, but when this was released in 1991, this was a gorgeous game. More so, Nintendo did get the chance to show off its new Mode 7 graphics for its map screen, which was a huge improvement over the little map in the corner of Zelda 1, and well, the entire lack of an in-game map in Zelda 2. Also, when you were in the dungeons, there was a detailed level-by-level map screen that showed Link's exact location, the rooms he'd already been in, and if he had the map item in that dungeon, the rooms he hadn't yet seen, as well as the location of the boss and the big chest. Speaking of the big chest, no, not that big chest. Yes, fan service FT dubs. Nintendo implemented a number of objects, themes, and other items in this game that stick around all the way until today. In terms of strictly gameplay-oriented items, Nintendo introduced the hookshot, bottles, fairies that you could catch in bottles, which would then revive Link if he died with one in a bottle, the magic hammer, swimming, running, lifting pots, and breaking them, which we all know Link absolutely can't stand doing. A lamp to light dark rooms instead of a candle, and finally, an ocarina. Yes, I know it's called a flute in the game, but look at it, it's a damn ocarina. But lest I forget, and last but certainly not least, this is the first Zelda game with pieces of heart. And I both love and hate pieces of heart. While they do add tremendous replay to the game and make you explore each area top to bottom to find them, it was just easier to find a heart container. Still, this and every one of these items were welcome additions to the game. Nintendo also introduces or mentions a lot of things in A Link to the Past that are in a Zelda game for the very first time. For example, it is the first time that Ganondorf is ever mentioned. Before this game, he was simply Ganon. And in this game, they describe his origins as a thief. They mention that the Triforce can grant wishes, which was not even implied before this game. It was just simply the ultimate power, and now we know that the Triforce is an
omnipotent and omniscient golden power.
See, I wasn't lying. That can grant the wish of the one who reaches it, which just so happens to be Ganondorf. It's the first time that Hyrule Castle is seen in the game, as well as the first time with items that could use your magic meter, as well as spells, like there were in Zelda 2. In this game, you use medallions to cast these spells, which would inflict heavy damage and affect the environment as well. It's also the first time we interact with Zelda herself, not counting the end of a game. In A Link to the Past, she has spoken dialogue and appears in the game in a major role for at least the first half of the game. This game also introduces Kakariko Village, Lake Hylia, the Lost Woods, Zora's Domain. Okay, it's actually called Zora's Waterfall,
oh my God, like, same thing, like, am I right?
In fact, this is the first time a Zora was shown as a good guy in a Zelda game. Until Ocarina of Time, Zoras were implicitly evil, and King Zora is the first Zora that is actually Link's ally. Oh, and there's King Zora for the first time as well. First appearance of Ganon's Tower, first time there was a chest game, or a shooting gallery, or a shovel, or a bar. Yes, a bar, not a cafe. LOL, Nintendo is so cute, a milk bar. There was a blacksmith for the first time, thieves, these annoying ass birds, and finally, this was the first time in the entire Zelda franchise that the Master Sword was mentioned by name. In Zelda 1 and Zelda 2, there was a magical sword, but it wasn't actually called the Master Sword. A lot of people called it that because in the screen where you got it in Zelda 1, there's a man that mentions Master using it and you can have this. So we called it the Master Sword anyways. But this was the first time that it was called that in the game. And well, it's been the Master Sword ever since. Oh, and an alternate reality. A parallel world. The fact that there is both a light world and a dark world in this game means you're basically exploring two huge Hyrules. Although the one in the dark world, also known as the Golden Land, is a much darker version of the one in the light world. Stronger enemies, dead grass, chickens with no feathers, For the most part, buildings and land structures are in the same place, but there are differences. Sometimes using the magic mirror, Link can go to one place on the map in the dark world and transport to the light world to reach areas in the game he otherwise wouldn't be able to reach. This gave even more depth to a game that was already deep. In the dark world, Hylians that had gone into the Golden Land seeking the Triforce were trapped and changed from their humanoid form to some sort of animal based on their nature. For example, Link, who is good-natured, turns into a pink rabbit, whereas other people might change into creatures or goblins or some other object. No big deal. Not like every Zelda game since then has had parallel worlds or alternate realities or some change in the world around it. Right? Ocarina of Time? Oracle of Ages and Seasons? Minish Cap? Twilight Princess? Nobody else sees this? Skyward Sword? Link Between Worlds? The Faces of it. The soundtrack in A Link to the Past was also mesmerizing. With the most songs and sound effects to date, it was the best in the series thus far, and also introduced Zelda's Lullaby for the first time. Koji Kondo, the composer of the first game, returned in a shower of glory with a new Sony SMP chip in the new Super Nintendo to play with, and the results are nothing short of breathtaking. Man, that Light World dungeon theme still gives me chills, man. Also, the controls are amazing. With added 8-directional movement, slicing sword strikes, and extra buttons for running, grabbing things, opening the map screen, and more, this was the best controlling Zelda game to date, and it could very well make an argument to be the best controlling all-around Zelda game of all time. Although, Twilight Princess HD might have taken that title. Now, fine. I'll stop being such a fanboy. And we'll get to the story in a bit, but basically in a nutshell, this game was perfect. They couldn't have done anything differently. The challenge is just right, not too hard, not too cryptic, the clues you receive are easy to decipher, and the map tells you exactly where you need to go. The dungeons are brilliantly designed, with puzzles that will rack your brain without pissing you off too badly, the bosses are epic, and the introduction of mini-games, trading sequences, and collecting items makes this a Zelda game with a ton of replay value. No second quest needed.
So yes, A Link to the Past was amazing. Just a fantastic game. Still one of my favorites in the series. For a long time, I considered it my favorite. I have to say, it's easily the most nostalgic Zelda in the series for me. I know I was waxing nostalgic for part 1, but that was a different type of nostalgia. This game, it was different. I don't know how to explain it. Most gamers have that one game they remember playing when they were young, or the first game that really hooked them as a gamer. It almost makes you want to tear up. It's just a memory of a simpler time. I don't know, it's just, there's not much I can say about this game bad. I don't know if I'm going to say anything bad in this video, really. I mean, what could I say? I mean, I guess I could say it didn't have blast processing. Sega Genesis could not handle a game like this. Don't tell the Sega fanboys that, hey, nothing was wrong with the Sega Genesis. I actually like the Genesis, but I'm sorry, but the Super Nintendo is my favorite system of all time because of games like this. Just, they couldn't make a better 16-bit Zelda game. They just couldn't. Now, I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of split opinions on this next statement, and that's fine. This is mine. I think it's a better game than Ocarina of Time. And the thing is, it's hard to compare the two. They're completely different. We'll talk more about Ocarina in a future episode, but that was a 3D game, which set a lot of standards for Zelda in that direction. This was the last great 2D Zelda game, but what it did for the franchise was so unique. It added so many elements to the Zelda franchise that to this day are still in use. In fact, this game single-handedly introduced more elements to the Zelda franchise that have been reused than any other game. In fact, a lot of the elements in Ocarina of Time debuted in this title first.
Back in the mists of time, before the era of The Legend of Zelda and the Adventure of Link, Hyrule was a land of fabulous palaces and magic. It was also a troubled land, and the divisions of light and dark were tearing it apart. The origins of this conflict lay even deeper in the shadows of time, with the coming of the Triforce and the greed of Ganondorf, the King of Thieves. To comprehend Hyrule and Link's desperate quest, one must first know the ancient legend of the Triforce. In the Golden Land, where it was placed by the creators of this world, the Triforce beckoned to people. Ganon and his band of thieves long searched for the secret entrance to the Golden Land, eventually stumbling upon it. Then Ganon defeated his fellows for possession of the Triforce. In a period known as the Imprisoning War, the King of Hyrule brought 7 wise men together to seal the door to the Golden Land, for Ganon's evil power had been spilling forth, causing corruption and darkness. The once peaceful land became a place of dreadful rumors of the coming of a magical enemy. At this time, the Master Sword was forged, but there was no hero valiant enough to wield it. Before the wise men could seal off the Golden Land and the Triforce, Ganon's army surged into Hyrule and besieged the castle. The Knights of Hyrule fought heroically, but the power of the Triforce controlled their enemies, giving them inhuman abilities. The battle raged back and forth through the gate. Many foes fell in the tide of battle, but too many knights also were lost. It seemed that they were beyond hope. Then, at the end of the day, the wise men finally succeeded in blocking the door to Ganon's realm. With the power of their master removed, the enemies fled or threw themselves into the moat. Hyrule was saved, and over the years the Golden Land, which then became known as the Dark World, faded from the memory of the people. The people of Hyrule may have forgotten about the Dark World, but the master of that evil land had not forgotten about Hyrule. Ganon brooded in his prison, surrounded by reminders of his fall. He grew ever more bitter as the dark years passed like the wailing of cold winds on a winter's night. Ambition burned in his eyes. He would find a way to wreak vengeance and claim total power. Many centuries passed, with Ganon and the Triforce safely locked away. Then the disasters began. Plague, drought, quakes, and fire. The king sought sage advice, and a wizard named Agahim stepped forth and ended the strange disasters. He became a powerful advisor to the king, but he kept his true plans to himself. It seemed like a golden age, but it wouldn't last. Once Agahim had consolidated his power, he began to abuse it. First of all victim were the ancestors of the 7 wise men. The wizard imprisoned 6 maidens in crystal cocoons, and they were never seen again. Then Princess Zelda herself was taken, as she sent a telepathic plea into the night. The Hylian gift that enabled Zelda to send her message also allowed Link to hear her. Having received Zelda's message, Link felt compelled to save her, but his uncle forbade him to leave their house. Link's uncle thought that the lad's courage outweighed his common sense, yet he knew that something had to be done to save Zelda. Turning away from Link, he gripped his family's sword. He knew a secret entrance into the castle, although he didn't know the way out. Waiting behind, Link couldn't tell how much time had passed since his uncle had left. A minute? An hour? The only thing he knew was that Zelda had spoken to him. He had to help her. Taking a lamp to light his way, Link stepped into the lashing rain and headed towards the castle. As Link floundered about in the storm, he heard a second telepathic message from Zelda telling of a secret route into the castle. When he found the entrance, he also found his uncle inside. wounded and unable to carry on. Link took his uncle's sword and promised to return. Then the great quest began.
I mean, even in Ocarina of Time, which is widely considered to be the best Zelda game of all time, in fact, in every other title I can think of, there's at least one thing that I'm like, ugh, but I can't think of one. I'm really trying, people. I've been thinking about it for like 3 hours. I can't think of anything in A Link to the Past that is cheesy, or that is unfair, or that is a bad thing. It's well designed, there's very few glitches, none of which can be triggered unless you know what you're doing. There's secrets everywhere. The enemies are hard, but they're not cruel, they're not unfair. The dungeons are so great. The story's fantastic. The dialogue is amazing. There's no bad translations or cryptic hints. Sorry, guys. Well, there is that commercial.
ゼルダの伝説出る出る出る出るついに出るゴージャス今度の冒険リアル君もすぐに体験憎いでやんすねこんちくしょう高画質の謎解きアクション戸惑うことなくのめり込もうもちのロンスーパーファミコン
You know, the funny thing is, the more I watch this commercial, the more I actually like it. See, even the commercials for A Link to the Past were fun. You didn't have any crazy, weird people talking about tech types.
Good times.
Or goofy white nerd kids rapping. It was just all the way around such a well-marketed, well-advertised, and well-designed game. It sold like hotcakes in Japan and even sold better in the United States, selling over 5 million copies, and was ranked Nintendo Power's #1 Super Nintendo game of all time. Consider that list for just 1 second. You've got the Donkey Kong Country series, the Final Fantasy series, Chrono Trigger, Earthbound, Star Fox, Super Metroid, Kirby, Street Fighter, Killer Instinct, and then there was some guy named Mario. You know, that guy. This game had such a lasting appeal that it remains popular to this day. In fact, of all the Zelda games out there, this is the one with the most fan hacks and ROM hacks. Oh, and don't forget, by the way, there were 2 other games based on this engine made that were never released in America. In fact, they were never really released in Japan either. They were only available for temporary download through the Nintendo Satellaview system, one of which was loosely based on A Link to the Past called Ancient Stone Tablets, and the other one was a complete remake of the original Legend of Zelda called BS The Legend of Zelda. And we're not going to talk about it too much here because that's for another episode down the line. The game only received 1 re-release before the debut of the Virtual Console, and that was for the Game Boy Advance, which came packaged with another title called Four Swords. The port itself of this game was pretty faithful, with the exception of 2 things. One, they changed a few of Link's sound effects. I guess they did that just to kind of stay in continuity with Ocarina of Time. And the second thing they did was they added a new dungeon, the Dungeon of the Four Sword, which it's really a shame that Nintendo made Four Swords unplayable unless you had friends, because this dungeon is amazing. If you're a Link to the Past fan and you've never played the Palace of the Four Swords, you owe it to yourself to figure out a way to do it, because it is harder than anything in the original game. It is tricky. It is a challenge for any Zelda player, especially especially if you're a Link to the Past fanatic like I am, you have to try it. It has now been 26 years since A Link to the Past was released in Japan in 1991. While I didn't get the chance to play it when it first came out, it was well worth the wait. I have never played a game that enthralled me as much as A Link to the Past did the first time I played it. I remember dreaming about it. I remember thinking about it while I was at school. And when I beat it, I had to go back and get all the heart pieces and get all the items I missed. It was the first time I had really truly felt like I was in a game. And I know there were games on the NES like the original Zelda that gave you that illusion, but this was the first game that felt like some of today's games can make you feel. It was cinematic and it was emotional. It really gave the player a sense that they were in an interactive movie of sorts. And I know for people who are seeing this game for the first time, they are probably thinking this game looks dated and old, but you have to experience it with an open mind and remember that this was 1993. There weren't games like Skyrim, The Witcher, or Grand Theft Auto. This was a whole new experience for me. And there have been very few moments in my life since that have enthralled me like A Link to the Past did the first time I played it. Funny enough, a lot of those moments that I've had since were with Zelda games. It's available on the Wii U Virtual Console, the 3DS Virtual Console, and on the Game Boy Advance, and of course, your Super Nintendo Entertainment System. It is a must-play, not only for Zelda fans, but for gamers. You owe it to yourself to play the game that made Zelda the juggernaut franchise that it is today.
In conclusion, there's not really anything I can say to put this game in words. It's a masterpiece. It's funny because when you go on Metacritic, it's rated at a 95. Universal acclaim! Which is great, by the way. But it's not even the top rated Zelda game. And there's, I believe, 5 games that are rated higher than A Link to the Past. That just shows the quality that goes into the Zelda franchise, and this was the first title to set that standard. One in which the next major console release, Ocarina of Time, would top. But we'll get to that in a couple episodes, because on our next episode, we're going to be talking about a different type of Zelda game. One in which was drastically different, but very similar and very familiar to A Link to the Past, but with one difference. You can take it on the go. It holds a special nostalgic place for a lot of people, including myself. On the next episode, we'll be talking about The Legend of Zelda, Link's Awakening, and Link's Awakening DX for the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color. Till then, I'm JSR. Thank you for watching. And remember to hold reset. Oh wait, you don't have to do that on the Super Nintendo. To hold reset, you turn the power off. Else you might lose your save data. Take care, folks.